Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, good morning again, and welcome to this very special edition of the Best Practice Network webinar series. We're actually bringing you an encore presentation from our recent VolunteerMatch Client Summit, which took place just last month in Detroit. My name is Lauren Wagner, and I'm the Senior Manager of Engagement at VolunteerMatch, and I'm going to be helping to facilitate this morning's session. So before we get started, wanted to go through a few housekeeping items. So we're going to save a few minutes at the end to pose your questions to the presenter this morning. So there are a few different ways that you can submit those questions throughout the presentation. The first way is by typing them into the box on the right-hand side of your screen through the GoToWebinar interface. And the second is through Twitter by tweeting them to @VM_solutions using the hashtag VMBPN. So again, keep those questions coming in throughout the presentation this morning, and we'll hold them for the end. Also, just so everybody on the call knows, a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recorded webinar will be sent around afterwards, so you will get all of this information as follow-up. So as I mentioned, we're bringing you a very exciting session that was actually the top-rated session through the entire summit. We're really excited to have Jake Sanches on the line and live in the office with us this morning to bring you his session from the summit. So a little bit of background. We this year had 110 employee engagement and volunteering professionals representing 62 different companies join us in Detroit for 2 days of networking and learning. So sessions this year kind of went through different topics, but a few of the topics that we covered were cross-sector collaboration, global pro bono volunteering, engaging millennials, and the session that Jake's going to be covering this morning, analyzing, reporting, and communicating your employee volunteer program data. So a little bit of background about Jake. He works at Palantir Technologies, which is a big data analytics company that builds products used to solve the world's hardest problems for government, commercial, and nonprofit institutions. He currently manages and analyzes Palantir's product metrics, working to provide insight to engineering and business development teams about how their customers are using and engaging with their products. What's also really cool about Jake is that he happens to be a volunteer for VolunteerMatch. So he's been working with us, lending his data science skills to help with the VolunteerMatch metrics benchmarking project. That's a mouthful right there. So this morning, Jake's going to be going through the findings and key takeaways from that project and discussing metrics analysis in more detail, as well as providing some examples of ways to increase your use and presentation of data in your communications. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and give things over to Jake to get us started. So give us 1 second here to change the presenter. And we will have Jake on the line.
Great. Okay. Can you switch over to me?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, everyone. So Lauren did a good job giving an intro to me, but I'll keep one slide back. We'll give you another brief introduction. So starting out, I am a data nerd. So background, I studied cognitive neuroscience at Washington, St. Louis. Instead of going into research, I pursued data analysis. I was doing some predictive modeling at Mattersight Corporation in Chicago for just over a year, looking at things like customer satisfaction, customer attrition, fraud. And then as Lauren went through at Palantir, I've been there a couple years now, working through different sorts of analysis from recruiting to internal people, satisfaction, attrition modeling, and then now working with the product teams to analyze how our customers are using Palantir. And many people have, or a good friend of mine has described me as a data-oriented person. And so I claim for credibility for my work as Excel Wizard level 45. It's not a real thing, but someone asked me at the summit if there were real levels. I'm going to go ahead and claim it. But kind of sort of standard data science skill sets, I enjoy analyzing anything across the board, and that's what I've been working with VolunteerMatch for the majority of 2014, helping the team think through the metrics that they're presenting and analyzing, and that's what I'll be going through today. So in this slide here, I just threw up for fun because I found it, I think, the day before the summit last time. When people describe data scientists, there's all of these skills, especially in 2014, and everything about big data that a data scientist essentially has. generally, the joke kind of goes that a data scientist is actually just a data analyst in Silicon Valley or San Francisco. So I think it's pretty clever. And though you can't see me on this webinar when I'm presented in person, I actually look a lot like that central character. So, all right. The goals of the webinar, just to go through kind of 4 high-level areas. First, just talking through using data to drive decision-making. I kind of went over quickly what I've done at Palantir for the last couple of years, internally primarily, and what I was doing in my previous job externally, working with customers, and now what I'm doing with VolunteerMatch. Has really all been about supporting leadership making decisions based on data. And so I'll talk through that. The second is just review VolunteerMatch's benchmarking survey. So we sent, for anyone who is a client of VolunteerMatch on the line, there was a survey sent out, I believe at the beginning of July, where we asked kind of the goals of different individuals and their organizations, what they are currently using in terms of metrics, what sort of metrics make sense to them, what do they want to know to help VolunteerMatch better think through the project that I've been working on and that we'll be continuing to discuss. And I'll get to that at the end of the presentation, what we're kind of planning to get to, we're moving towards. Third, just thinking about EVP data differently. About how do you measure a volunteer program, and how do you actually describe the success and track the success and progress of a program. And then just a small piece on demonstrating impact to different audiences through communicating data. So a lot of what I discuss and do day-to-day is different sorts of analysis, getting kind of dirty with cleaning data, spreadsheets all day long. But the key piece is actually getting to the point of communicating it and presenting it to leadership. And so I'll give a few tips at the end related to that. All right, so data-driven decision-making. This is one of those buzz terms in businesses today. I think it has real value in, and you can see in this image, finding signal from the noise. So many companies and around the internet, we are collecting vast amounts of data. And Palantir Technologies, where I work, our entire platform is built around enabling companies to analyze their data. And it's really about using data to make informed decisions or inform product work. In terms of volunteering, it's how are we, what are we doing with our program? How do we move this program forward? How do we further engage our employees? But it's a universal kind of thing, is trying to find that signal from the noise. And I can't talk about data without having a little bit of fun and talk about some of my personal interest in data and kind of the data-driven decision-making that is in our everyday lives. So if anyone has heard of 538.com, it's a great blog. Nate Silver, who was previously he became famous with at the New York Times predicting the last presidential election. They did a America's Best Burrito Bracket, and this was taking place for about a month, and I think it completed right before the summit. But they did a fairly structured, data-driven approach to what is the best burrito in America. And it turns out La Taqueria, which is about a mile from my apartment here in San Francisco, ended up winning the best burrito in America. And so you actually now can't even go there because the lines are out the door. But these are, different sort of fun visualizations that the site puts together regularly. And I visit every other day, and I follow lots of different data scientists on Twitter that post things like this. So data is everywhere. People are using it to quantify what is good, what is great, or what should we be paying attention to. So I highly encourage you, if you're a burrito fan, they assess the entire country. So I'm sure based on your region, there will be one local to you, close to you. So data-driven decision-making, this is one of my favorite things on the internet, so I decided to include this. LinkedIn provides just amazing summary of data that they have to the public, to any of their members, to essentially look within, and as I mentioned, I went to Washington University in St. Louis. This is just within my own LinkedIn profile. You can look at where all other individuals who have LinkedIn profiles, where they live, where they work, what they do, and there's actually several different ways to pivot and cut the data, and they now provide different solutions. But to college students, to recent graduates, to high school students, thinking about where they want to go to school. All of this information is presented in a very high level, clean, interactive dashboard. And that's really what, and we'll be talking about this a little bit later, but what we want to do with some of VolunteerMatch's metrics is get it into an interactive dashboard that's displaying information, because it's powerful. We can tell you some of these stats about where WashU grads live, where they're going, where their what companies they've gone to after graduation. Presenting this data, especially in this bar chart format in kind of a descending order of population, is extremely. It makes it extremely easy to understand these trends within a few seconds. That's really the key to data-driven decision-making. If you want to have very high-level but clear understanding of your data at first glance, and then diving into the details. So just another one of my favorite things on the internet. It's pretty great. So moving into volunteer programs. So unlocking value in your data. Really, what we're trying to do with VolunteerMatch is use data to drive this generation of employee volunteer programs. And some of the normal metrics and more traditional metrics around volunteering are, what are the total number of hours? What are the total number of employees volunteering? And these are great. These are good basic base level things to look at, but they're not the whole story, and they're not the only way or the only cut to be able to look at your data to continue to grow the program and start thinking long term. Start actually tracking trends over time. And so we'll dig into what are the metrics that organizations can start thinking about as they look to grow their volunteer programs. So the benchmarking metrics project survey that I mentioned was sent out in July 2014. I'll give a kind of quick summary of what we learned from the different respondents. Not surprising, the top metrics were total number of hours, total number of employees volunteering. What is the participation rate, essentially, of the employee population? And then what's the ROI? What's the dollar value of the volunteer, of what our volunteers are producing to the organizations with which they are volunteering? So going into that a little further, I can't talk about a metrics project survey without showing you some data visualizations from how we thought about analyzing the survey. So out of the categories of metrics, the highest level, and you can see this very clearly, the absolutely critical in red is...
Time out for 1 second. Sorry, we have... It can get a little loud in our office sometimes.
Fire truck going by.
Okay. I think we're good.
So the employee engagement is the key piece that our clients are looking to have better metrics or to regularly report on. It's just number of hours, sign-ups, volunteers. And then from there you can see the distribution of benchmarking by other companies, whether or not that they found that value will impact by cause, site utilization, and nonprofit engagement. I was a little actually surprised by some of the absolutely versus very and useful where individuals saw value in some of the metrics, especially in terms of thinking about how to grow the program and where their employees are interested, so impact by cause. And some of the thinking around that was maybe they just, at VolunteerMatch, we haven't thought about helping to describe ways to think about that data differently, and that's what we're looking to do going forward.
So just real quick, if you want to stay on that slide for 1 second. So just to give everybody on the call a little bit of background so that you can kind of understand when we're talking about here site utilization, things of that nature. We were kind of looking at, since the people that were surveyed were VolunteerMatch clients that are using the VolunteerMatch solutions to manage and track their employee volunteer programs, we're basically looking at, in that one anyways, site utilization of their employees coming to the VolunteerMatch site to find volunteer opportunities, sign up on the site, track their hours, etc. So just a little bit of background on that.
Yep, thanks. And going into more specifically that first category at the top with an employee engagement, we looked even in the distribution of what are the different metrics that we could be providing on a regular basis. Most respondents said that they wanted the percentage of employees who have tracked hours as the top line, absolutely critical metric that they wanted to see. And then the percentage of employees who are unique volunteers, essentially if they're doing a point in time, what percentage of the employee population are volunteering. And then down to the bottom, the kind of less critical, but maybe nice to have are skills utilized, things like that. And so we're taking all of this information into account as we rethink some of the metrics that we're presenting on the VolunteerMatch client sites. And just from a data visualization standpoint, looking at this, this is a powerful way to essentially get a very quick synthesis of what are our respondents actually looking for, and it's that the top level, what's that absolutely critical, that red bar, what metrics they want to see, and so we're listening. We look through those different metrics, and we're going to put together dashboards based on some of these replies, and then very high level what metrics matter within. So I kind of went through this already, and I'll get into this in a few more slides. So in terms of measuring the programs and demonstrating impact, kind of the thesis of the way that we're thinking from the survey and going into some of the dashboards that we're looking to build out, it's really essential to start with what are the questions that need to be answered. And anytime someone does data analysis or thinks about if you have data, if you have metrics that you should display, you have to have questions to answer in order to actually get anywhere with it. And so measuring the impact of an employee volunteer program needs to start with a baseline. Essentially, where are we? What are we doing today? And then where do we need to go? Some of VolunteerMatch's clients are maybe in their first 3 to 6 months, or they've been with VolunteerMatch for several years. They have different needs, and they have different thoughts about how to grow their program. And so we want to take that into account in how we present data, how they think about data, and how they present data internally to their organizations. Especially to answer that last question of how are we doing on our way to our goals. And so that's pretty key in terms of demonstrating the value and the progress of employee volunteer programs. And I think that the last line is that stories are great, but they don't provide the high-level structured picture for a program. And that's that quantitative element that, as some of you know, either as executives yourselves or who work with leadership teams at your organizations, they want data. This is especially true with all the directors I work with. They want data to understand the qualitative stories, the understanding impact, and how to kind of continue with some of the initiatives going on within the organization. And so balancing data and communication, what can you do? So my kind of takeaway from thinking about as we're trying to get individuals to think more critically about their metrics and providing it on a regular basis is we'll provide several metrics that are valuable, but in order to answer those questions that were on the previous slide is determining what metrics work for you. So there's a lot of data out there, and I'll get into this in a few more slides, but if you start using data in your communications or start thinking about it for your organization, you've never done it before. I actually know this because my mom works at an organization where they're only just starting to use data to drive some of their work, and you almost can get overwhelmed. So you need to start simple. Start with metrics that work for you, and then grow over time instead of presenting everything all at once. And then reporting consistently. Using a visualization over a statistic over a line in email is incredibly important when you talk about the data that you're tracking. Last night, I read an article that was based on a research study that said that 67%, it was essentially comparing whether or not you visualize a metric versus use words to describe it. And I didn't go into it originally, but I studied cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience, so I did research for 3 years, and I think I'm just fascinated whenever I see something like that. But 67% of individuals, when they were given a statistic, and this is for all of you on the line, if you're given a statistic in writing, they tend not to believe it. But if it's visualized, 97% will believe it. I thought that was fascinating. Visualization, communicating data with charts and graphs is powerful, and especially for individuals that don't have large attention spans. And there's so many things out there that are capturing our attention, especially with the internet. usually visualization communicates quickly. So reporting consistently with a visualization is one of the biggest stresses I have for thinking about how to communicate data and analyzing data for a volunteer program. Generating a plan at the bottom and then revisiting it at regular check-ins with metrics at hand. Starting to think about how to structure data plus communication in order to use data to drive a program or drive an initiative, if it's a volunteer program or something else. I think these apply to any sort of data-driven approaches. So now going into just generally a little bit, taking a step higher level to just presenting data visually. I can't talk about using data without actually giving some tips about how you should or how you could think about presenting data and using it to communicate your program or communicate any sort of initiative that you have. Numbers are great. Show me trends. And John Tsugi kind of has a lot of famous quotes around analysis and communicating data. But when you notice what you never expected to see, and so I have a couple slides related to that. It's always powerful. Again, I'm going to reiterate visualizing data and communicating it in fairly simple but clean graphs. On this slide, just kind of Palantir Technologies. I didn't talk about it too much. It's a big data analytics platform, and some of the products that we use are data visualization. You can kind of see these images where there's a highlighted bar chart on there, and so what we work with each of our customers on is how do they need to think about their data? And we're talking massive scale data. What is the best way to frame their data visually to them? And that's a large part of what we do as a company. I don't use the software. I work internally to communicate data, but that's just something to give you context for the organization for which I work. So going into just dashboards. So this is the Google Analytics, I think, circa 2007. I used one of those stock images on the free use images on the internet. But this is all over the place that we have dashboards all around the internet, and anyone who runs a site on the internet can use Google Analytics to track trends. There's a lot going on here, and going back to my point about using 3 to 5 metrics or choosing ones that work for you. There's a lot in one dashboard, and I think some individuals tend to start with, okay, let's look at everything all at once. You really have to think critically about how are you communicating your data? How are you presenting it? Or you're enabling either yourself or the employees to which you're communicating or to leadership to which you're communicating to really think about what is the most important thing I need to see in terms of the data that's presented. And so I find this a little bit messy, and I think there are ways to increase over time, but always think about not presenting everything all at once, but what are the most important pieces that we need to see and think about. And so I have a couple fun slides here. So understanding trends. I actually created these. Another cool thing in the internet, if you're getting anything out of this webinar, there are great data analysis or freely available data on the internet that you can kind of interact with to learn more kind of about the world. This is a books Ngram viewer that Google provides essentially for the last 200 years, books that were scanned in, and what is the trend of the specific words appearing in all, and as percentage of all words in books for the last 200 years. You can see in the 1980s there was a kind of robot end-of-the-world apocalypse theme for some reason. I think that kind of went down into 2000, monster, and then Wizard and Vampire started to peak up in 2000. So you can go ahead and use that and play with it to kind of see what those trends look like for really any word that appears in books. It's a really powerful tool. The reason I'm sharing this is actually because when you understand trends, you have to think about trends in context. And so if you're thinking about presenting data, go to the next slide. You have to think about it in context of what is your axis. So we're looking across 200 years in the bottom here, but you're not seeing the higher order relationship with other words and other trends that are going on. And so you can see war peaked right around World War I, World War II, and all books that were ever published. But you completely hide those original 4 words, monster, robot, wizard, vampire, because of those larger trends throughout history. about presenting metrics, it's very important to think about the context in which that you're providing it, and not to distort the higher level picture of what are the trends that you're actually seeing. And that's especially true for thinking about time series data. If you're thinking about your program, if you're reporting on it at a quarterly basis or monthly basis or yearly basis, what's the stat that makes the most sense for you? If you've only just started on having an employee volunteering program, that you have a dedicated person, or you are that person that has just started working to track it or using VolunteerMatch for the first time, you can't have quarterly reporting that's going to make sense. You need to present it and think about it in ways that work for you.
So, Jake, I have a quick question for you. So, when you're talking about looking at trends and data in kind of relation to the context in which you're looking at those trends, are you talking about kind of events that have maybe taken place that would impact the trends that you're seeing? So, is that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the last slide essentially, and this is actually this next slide kind of digs into.
Perfect.
But essentially, what are the events? What are the context in which some of those trends happen? So I took that theme of wizards and vampires, and this is a different tool that essentially looks at news trends and internet trends rather than books for the last, I think it was 10 years, and you can see Harry Potter and Twilight, Wizards and Vampires. Each of those peaks is, so I think July 2007, I remember because I went to the movie, or actually picked up the book, excuse me, was the release of the last Harry Potter book. And so you can see those peaks happen at specific events. Taking that abstraction back to thinking about volunteer programs, one sort of way to look at trends in employee, the number of volunteers, number of hours over time is when you have an event, and this is something that we're starting to think about how do we better incorporate it into our site, what is the impact of a company-wide event or company-wide initiative around volunteering, and then how does that impact the kind of cascading effects of volunteering? How does that look at engagement over time? And so, yeah, it's exactly what are the events that give you context to why you see peaks? And that's you kind of need use your human brain to make sense of, okay, we're seeing this pattern, but what's the larger reason? And on the last slide, you look at the war and peace changes, the peak based on context of what's going on in the world at the time.
So, Jake, would you suggest that kind of before people start really looking at the trends and trying to make sense of them, they kind of come up with almost like a timeline of maybe major events or transitions or things that had happened over the past year or so, and then, or over the time that they're looking at anyways, and then try to kind of compare that?
Yeah, exactly. So thinking about, and one of the biggest recommendations I have is, especially if you're thinking about growing your program or using data to really drive the conversation about growing your program, is understanding why you're going to see fluctuations or why you're going to see different jumps. And I think you get into it a little bit later, but if you think about trends in different causes where employees are engaging at different points in time, understanding that around Christmas time there's different engagements around different causes, or if some clients and organizations will have a employee-sponsored volunteering day, and you see what was the impact of that, and so you can go back and say, okay, how did the trend happen over time? So yeah, exactly, tracking that and understanding why those fluctuations are happening to help drive the conversation.
And even looking at, like you mentioned, even looking at external trends, so things that maybe didn't happen within the company that you were saying, like around holiday time, giving those up, or maybe there was, hopefully not, but a natural disaster or something that would kind of spur people to get more involved.
Exactly.
At different times. Cool.
Yeah, exactly.
And are there places, I know, so it looks like somebody could go here to kind of find out what those events that are kind of happening over the course of time are. And where is this again?
This is just another, it's like Google Trends. It's a pretty cool tool. I'm kind of throwing lots of fun internet data visualization or data sources that are completely freely available, and you can actually kind of get, I can spend hours on some of these things, but get a view of the world. So yeah, Google I think .com/trends, and then the other one's the Ngram viewer, which I find fascinating, looking at how authors change over time. Absolutely, yeah, very very clean time series line graph, giving a sense for what are the events, and then each of those events that you click on there, you can see exactly what that peak was, and they use like an automated algorithm to identify what that is. Cool, good question. Great. So taking back to employee volunteer programs, as I mentioned a little bit, so choosing the right metrics is the starting point before you go into how you should visualize your data. And this is what we're taking those benchmarking surveys and then translating that to how do we communicate, what are the most important metrics to our clients, and how do we then help drive that conversation with them. So one of the highest level metrics that was requested that VolunteerMatch already does provide is what is just the total number of hours or number of employees that are volunteering, just at a point in time. And I think that's interesting to just like have that number. And some organizations really just want like in 2013, 2014, how many did we do? I think it's more powerful, absolutely, to look at the distribution of hours. How were the hours actually utilized for different types of employees? So answering a question of, am I getting new employees into the program? Again, we're talking data-driven decision making. So thinking about hours of like employees that are in their first 6 months of work and then starting to get into their volunteering program versus employees that have been with the company or have been volunteering on and off for the last 2 to 5 years, and they have very different needs and very different interests that can help someone who's running an employee volunteer program better understand how to communicate, how to interact with, and how to engage the different employees. And so using the data to develop visualizations that understand those differences in distribution is a stronger way to think about, okay, total number of hours or total number of employees volunteering, but what are the demographics of those populations? Then by location or division, and a lot of individuals wrote on the benchmarking survey that they want to do much more comparison or understanding of like where are the rockstar locations? Like if you're a large organizations that have 30 offices and they have very different needs of volunteering or different ways to think about their program based on different divisions or locations, looking at that distribution of activities or hours by different locations and creating a visualization to compare those and communicating that out to the business. And one way is actually to potentially like use that and use those visualizations and those trends to drive competition between locations or divisions to say, okay, this group is volunteering in these causes, or or like drive for 30 days a comparison of like what percentage of employees have volunteered in the last 30 days, compare it by division or compare it by different areas of the organization. These are also, like, I think, really critical ways to think about how you can better engage employees and how you can continue to help them find new opportunities for volunteering. And it really helps you and helps identify where the rock stars and who's really like the key to the success of my volunteer program. And then stickiness. This is something I actually, from a product metrics perspective, and a lot of my job is how do you capture users? How do you continue to have users? How do you engage someone? And I think from like the volunteer life cycle, how do you think about someone who's continuing to volunteer, continuing to find new opportunities or find that cause that matters most to them? And so the depth metrics of average number of hours per activity per employee, average activities per employee. Those are just different ways to think about the data, and we can provide it in a way that helps our VolunteerMatch's clients use that data and then create different levels of reporting or levels of pivoting it based on their needs. And so we're starting to think about what are those metrics, but again, they're going to differ by organization. At the summit, we actually had, and I had this conversation at lunch, there was a woman who was at an organization, I believe, less than 900 employees, and then sitting next to someone at an organization of 50,000 employees. And vastly different needs, vastly different interests in what data that they wanted to communicate and what their leadership wanted to communicate. So we actually talked specifically about these metrics, about what makes sense for them. And then, as Lauren mentioned earlier, site utilization, number of signups versus conversions. And this is the VolunteerMatch partners, or client sites, actually going in and reporting on metrics for number of signups over time, like in the last 3 days, the last quarter, for different activities versus conversions. Essentially, someone who's logging into the site, looking at opportunities, but what percentage of them are actually engaging in a real volunteering opportunity. And that helps someone who's running an employee volunteer program better think about how they're communicating about the site, how they're marketing, the ways to utilize the VolunteerMatch site, and also helps VolunteerMatch understand, like, how can we better present information and make it easier to access and find volunteering opportunities. And it's actually, for anyone on the line who's currently a VolunteerMatch client, it's the benchmark that we provide around connection rate. And then what impacts did we make on the community? So many of the comments on the survey talked about what impacts that we made. And there are different ways to think about it. And I have a couple slides showing kind of new ways to think about visualizing it. But histogram distribution of causes or organization, total number of hours that an employee volunteers by cause, a percentage distribution of the total. These are different sorts of formulas for analysis that are different from essentially one number of we had 53 hours devoted to unemployment. So again, visualizing these metrics, and I think it's on the next slide to kind of drive that point.
So just real quick, just for people who might not know what a histogram distribution is, could you? Oh,
yeah, sure. It's actually on the next slide.
I'm sorry.
No, yeah, actually, I got that question.
Okay.
Yeah, histogram is essentially an overall distribution of where I guess essentially resources are going. But I think, is there anything on the bottom of this slide? Oh, we already talked about the actions to drive targeting employee population by cause, and then context of time of year, yearly trends to help drive new opportunities or marketing new opportunities, maybe about children and youth around the holidays. So using data, understanding historical trends, and then using that to think about communications, or using that to think about how to engage employees in potentially upcoming opportunities within a specific cause. And that's the, I was hoping I was right about which slide was next. This is what I mean by a histogram of a distribution. So this is, instead of looking at essentially what are the individual numbers devoted per cause, this is percentage distribution of total number of hours, essentially by different cause area. Where are our employees spending their volunteer hours out of the total whole of 100% of our employees volunteering? And so this is a very powerful way to show, like, okay, our employees, they're spending more of their time on, or for the causes in which they are either listing as where they're interested in, or spending, or actually volunteering more within one sort of cause than another. And so having some sort of visualization about that is pretty powerful to be able to communicate out and show this is the impact that we're having, or that we're driving towards in different areas. And so thinking about benchmarking those, actually I think, yeah, thinking about benchmarking those, how, like, answering the question, how am I doing compared to my industry, compared to companies of similar size? For current VolunteerMatch clients, the below is essentially the current state of the benchmarking report that we're looking to get automated into the VolunteerMatch sites to start thinking about, like, how do we not only present the data but show what is the expected, or the other individual peer companies, organizations. What are they doing? How are they actually doing on some of these metrics? That's really the key to benchmarking that we're starting to think about on some of these points of distribution, on some of these trends, and about number of hours, or about percentage distribution of time how are we comparing? And so that's a key point, not only of like, what are these distributions, but how are these compared to other individuals?
I think we have another fire truck coming by. Busy morning in San Francisco.
All right. And going into some of the ways that we're starting to think about presenting some of our metrics. This is a quick mock-up comparing different metrics kind of all in one graph. Currently, I mentioned earlier, instead of presenting one single line of here's the number of volunteer hours that we have or that we've done, thinking about, okay, look at each month using that time, the time series on that bottom axis. What are by month the number of volunteering hours? How did we actually trend? Like maybe there's context involved. Maybe there's some something that happened where we saw these trends differ. And so on the left axis is those blue bars, just total number of hours. On the right is the running sum of hours, and so you can actually see the trend in those orange lines. That essentially the slope is what is essentially the velocity of growth. And so we're in the work that we're taking in this benchmarking project, rethinking about how to present some of these metrics in unified dashboards that make sense and tell an overall story. And so this is just kind of one example, quick look. And then I mentioned before benchmarking and also just comparing different distributions. This is what I mean by that. So before I had the distribution of just the general population. It's more powerful to also look at what are the differences in the population. So how are my new employees versus my experienced employees? This is one example that I came up with of where are they interested in spending their time? What causes matter to them? I think I'm jumping ahead of myself, but comparing in terms of like thinking about how to engage different employees, I'm a millennial myself. I may have very different interests and needs in terms of where I'm interested in engaging, and looking at these sorts of trends are interesting to me to see like what are the differences? How can we actually cater the program to employees based on if they're new, if they've just started volunteering, if they've only been with the company for a small period of time, they're going to come in and get excited about these new opportunities, and they have different sort of ways of needs for engagement than more experienced employees. And then we had a lot of great feedback on the survey that, and then kind of coming from some conversations that we're having are just what are unique new metrics that we can consider and start to visualize and provide on a regular basis. I mentioned who are the rock stars? Who are your most important volunteers? And those are the individuals that are not just volunteering regularly, but which ones are bringing in other volunteers with them to events. And it's essentially looking at what events or opportunities are getting filled, but what events or opportunities are getting filled by more than one of your employees because you have an employee that's bringing in other individuals. That's pretty powerful to understand how a program can be grown. Another is skills gained through volunteering, and that's not all collected currently, and something that we're starting to think through is what are, and this goes to some skills-based volunteering versus non-skills-based volunteering, either utilizing their skills, but also what are employees able to learn from or gain out of their volunteering experience? That if we have a way to summarize and synthesize that, better thinking about how to engage and grow engage the employees and grow the program based on that sort of highlight. And then I mentioned briefly before too, what happens after a special event? What happens when there's a employee engagement volunteering day or week or month? Every organization is different in terms of what makes the most sense for them to have. But how do the metrics change? Now, average number of activities, the 30 days signed up for, the 30 days following. Really, how do we think about visualizing and synthesizing how volunteering with your organization for essentially sponsored events lead to personal volunteering, and how can we actually summarize that? And then just talking now about communicating about the program. So I've gone into thinking about how to visualize it, what are the metrics that we're looking to consider, and how we've been thinking about some of the metrics that VolunteerMatch is going to be able to provide. But what are the audiences? And that's a key thing, again, with context about data that's being presented. But what are the audiences to which you can provide metrics? And the first is employees, the general population, communicating about the program, or what is the impact? What are the causes? What are the specific organizations? That's going to be maybe the distribution sort of summary, but also the list of organizations, like giving a good synthesis of how, telling a story with the data to say, where is that impact at, to show the growth engagement of the employees. Another is leadership. What's the value of the program? They're asking the questions of, okay, what are we doing here? How are we continuing to engage our employees? What are our employees giving back? And translating that to a dollar value. That's something that many individuals kind of ask or mention that that's what their leadership are looking for. And then investors in the public. Some clients have sites devoted to discussing and publicizing the work that their employees are doing from a volunteering and philanthropic perspective. And that's maybe a mixture of the above, like impact on the community, who and how much, and then to nonprofits with which a company has partnered. Essentially, how many employees? Ooh. That just go down. There we go. Had a pop up on my computer. And how many hours? So thinking about communicating at different levels is important once you start doing it about the growth of your program. And then marketing to employees and to the public is critical. As I mentioned, I'm a millennial, the very specific sort of population. You can see studies all over the place. I know it came up several times at the VolunteerMatch Summit in terms of this specific population. And I already know that I think it's Gen Z is next, and they're going to have very different needs as well. But it's important not only to retaining talent, but also getting talent. How to attract employees to your organization. Having a good synthesis of your program and the opportunities, and providing it to recruiting or human resources or leadership to say, this is something that we should be communicating to prospective employees is huge. And so thinking about how can you take the data about your program, give some sort of synthesis and good visualization with, again, small attention span. I want to see what are you providing for me. Having that available with data is really powerful. And millennials are. This is one that I found out of dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of different statistics about what millennials are looking for employees, companies giving back to the community. So I think that's important. Again, thinking about who you're communicating to, who are the audiences, and what's the data you're providing in that case. And then some quick final tips for communicating data. If you are regularly, and I've seen some examples that were shared with me with some of our current clients with volunteer matches, emailing updates or newsletters. One of the biggest things I've noticed in my current role, I daily will send summaries of data, summaries of or get requests for different sorts of data around the business, especially recruiting. Pasting a chart in an email is, I think, several orders of magnitude more likely to get understood and read than attaching it as a PDF or attaching it as a PowerPoint presentation or my favorite, Excel. I tend to dream in Excel, but it turns out my leadership or most of the engineers with whom I work don't want to look at Excel documents. And so having a very good, clean image pasted in an email or a newsletter is really powerful in terms of communicating data. The high-level summary up front, just the bottom line, what is the most important thing when you're especially considering visualizing multiple points of data, and this is something that we're thinking about at the client sites at VolunteerMatch. Like, what are the most important things? Where's the location on the page? How can we communicate it best? You want the highest level. What's the most important metric? And maybe that is, like, what is the total number of hours? And then you go into those trends. where should I be looking? Where should I, if you have a few seconds to capture my attention, what is the thing that I need to know immediately? And then this is huge as well. This is one of the biggest learnings I've had is if the data doesn't look good, and this goes to that context, and what are the axes that you're showing? Acknowledge it. Write a plan to address it. If you're, and this is just very broad, any sort of data that you're talking about. Write a plan to address it. Say, hey, we know this is for X, Y, Z reason, whatever context. What do we want to do about that? Because we know that we're expecting more. This is what quarterly meetings are all about for businesses. I think earlier you saw a little bit of a mixture on this, but time series are usually line graphs, looking at how trends change over time. People can better understand it and grasp it when they're listed out as a line graph. I don't think I put this on here, but whenever you're looking at distributions, I mentioned a histogram before because pie charts are just not a good way to communicate data. So I forgot to put that as a bullet point. But enough, there are all sorts of resources out there for thinking about how to present data visually, and some famous individuals who have tips. I think one of the biggest is Tony a pie chart, and that goes to the proportions versus raw counts, giving a total number of hours versus a distribution. I think a distribution actually tells a better story. It tells a better story to actually take action on. And then if you're putting colors in a graph, I've made this mistake early in my career. Don't put more than 6 colors in a graph. It's far too confusing, and only use it for categories, not numbers. I have some favorite sites about data on the internet that just show bad graphs, and that's one of the biggest errors that individuals make when they're trying to communicate data is too many colors, not using it the right way. And then red is the most important. What's the most important thing? I think on the earlier slides I had the critical was red. If it's bad, or if it's the most important, we call it badness. When we're talking about product metrics, is make it red. What's the thing I should really be concerned about? So those are my tips on communicating data. Last, VolunteerMatch, kind of leading the way and thinking about what are the volunteer metrics that can be utilized by their clients. And so the new metrics reports that we're working on as a result of the benchmarking project, the survey that we sent out, is using new tools to enhance data presentation. So we're working on finding the right way to integrate interactive dashboards, as I mentioned earlier, into the VolunteerMatch site. Much easier to find high-level data. Right now, there are all sorts of ways to get data from VolunteerMatch, but we want to make it even easier with these interactive tools. More visually appealing, some of the latest in web technology has some really great aesthetics. I mentioned interactive, and they'll live right within each of VolunteerMatch's client sites. So I think that is it. Yep. Turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so if you want to go ahead and give the controls back to me, we'll head into a few minutes of Q&A. All right. So let me just get things pulled up here real quick. So just a reminder to everybody on the line, you can still submit questions during the Q&A portion. You can use the box on the right side of your screen or submit them on Twitter using hashtag VMVPN. So where to start? There's a few great questions here. So when it comes to, so I guess you can look at this from either people who've been at it for a long time and really want to just start analyzing, or people who are just getting started and want to be able to analyze moving forward. How much data do they need to start really looking at those trends? Like, how far back should they go, or how long should they wait?
Yeah. Absolutely, great question. And I had some really great conversations at Summit about exactly this. So I think any data that you have is a good starting point. If you're looking to be very proactive about analyzing data, if you're even just new to analyzing data on your own, is just getting a sense for what you have. One of the first things when I get a new data set, or when I've worked on new projects, is what do we have? What's already there? And you can create a trend look at different distributions. Some of mine are a little more statistically oriented, but that's the first thing, is like high-level summaries of minimum, maximums, mean, medians, if it's a numeric metric. Those are a good starting point with, as few as 10 rows of data. You really want to get just a very high-level understanding of what data is there, and then you can say, what data might I need? What do I not have here that I might need? And that's actually driving a conversation better once you know that. So I always recommend, if you're just starting out, to start basic, figure out what's the one metric that actually has something that makes sense. And in terms of that time period, if you're just starting out with a program, or just starting out with, it's not volunteering related, if you're just thinking about communicating data, generally, if it's 1, 2, 3 months in, you can look at, if you have data at the level of week or day, you can start there. But at that point, it's maybe not even about the time series, and you shouldn't. Again, if we're thinking about supplying data on a quarterly basis, you may not have past historical data, and so you just need to be able to have that context and say, we didn't have data for this point in time. That's a lot of what I do. My job. We didn't have data at that point.
Awesome, thanks. So what about, so for people who maybe aren't using a tool like VolunteerMatch or something else, what are the best tools to track and analyze their data that might be available to them?
That's a great question. So generally, if you have data, I'm just going to, almost universally, you'll be able to get it into essentially Excel document, or if it's a CSV, you can put it into Excel. I definitely recommend, and Excel can be a little overwhelming at first, but it's probably where your data is stored, or if you have however it's provided, either within a site, if you're using a different tool, they're probably hopefully going to allow you to export that data and then put it into Excel. Starting there, I think there's, if you're just starting out, using the very quick tools to create a chart, because they have wizards that will walk you through it. That's probably one of the best ways. There are some tools on the internet that allow you to essentially import your data, but I don't recommend that if you're just starting out. There's some infographic tools because you run the risk of not formatting your data correctly, or not selecting, what is the right axis, or what is the right, you can actually see that summary, and you, any organization, there are Excel wizards like myself running around, and so finding someone to help get you trained up on different Excel tips are probably somewhere within your organization, someone you know. I get calls regularly, even at work, by my roommates asking Excel tips, and I think that's just a good starting point.
So you actually answered one of the next questions and touched on another one. So resources within companies to help them analyze. So where in kind of your typical company would a data scientist, or where would the Jakes live within a company?
Great question. So I've come at this from very different perspectives, from the business analyst side. And I made a joke earlier that anyone in San Francisco or Silicon Valley is, if they analyze data, if they're a data analyst, they're called a data scientist. Not exactly true. Getting started just with a data analyst is going to be someone who works finance individuals are going to need to know their way around synthesizing and summarizing data, spreadsheets. Maybe not exactly data visualization, but that's kind of a good starting place. If you're at an organization that has business analysts or any sort of customer-facing, if you have a service, or even if you're a company that has a product, you'll have those individuals that engage with customers. I think that's a good source of someone, because like I'm speaking to you today, we're trying to provide for VolunteerMatch clients. Every organization that has a customer that they serve, they're going to have similar questions about data. They're going to have similar questions about their product. And so someone who engages with customers or if you have data that you or your organization provides, that's a great place. Also, there's, if you have a business intelligence org, they will have those skills or be able to kind of help you out along the way. They might be a little bit more database-oriented rather than analysis-oriented. Yeah, I think that's
awesome. Great. Well, so we're starting to close in on the hour here. So once again, want to thank Jake for coming into the office and for joining us on the webinar this morning. Lots of great information. Went through a lot this morning, so we will definitely be sending everything to you afterwards. So you'll get the presentation, you'll get a link to the recording, so you'll be able to kind of, re-listen to all of the great information that Jake shared. So in closing, just to remind everybody, there are a few different ways that you can stay informed and up to date with VolunteerMatch aside from these webinars. So you can follow us on the blog at volunteeringiscsr.org, on Twitter at VM_solutions, and also sign up for our monthly Good Companies newsletter, which you can do right from the Volunteering is CSR blog. Also, save the date for next month, November 20th. We'll be welcoming Michael Stroik from CECP. He'll be giving us an overview of their recently released 2014 Giving in Numbers report. So we'll be looking at insights from CECP's annual research. So the link to sign up for that will be in the webinar or the webinar follow-up that you'll get. And hopefully we will see you next month. So thanks again, Jake. And everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you next month. Bye.
Bye, everyone.